So I'm going to fix it, but I wanted to make sure that we were live and we were on time, and I figured that that we would double team you, that Dr. Rick 1 and 2. I need twice the brain and twice the intellectual horsepower to be able to do this podcast with you, Brock. So especially as a substitute for Jeremy Potter's brain. So I'll wait for Jeremy to kick in here, but let me fix my settings, and
I feel like I'm being like interviewed. There's like a whole panel of Ricks talking to me. Yeah.
Hold on, let me see if I could. Oh, I gotta get rid of one of the Ricks. All right.
We got Detroit time is on time. What's up, Potter?
Yeah. I'm gonna try to remove
Brock.
I'm glad you got to see the two Ricks. Yeah, it's like very Rick and Morty.
Well, welcome to Real Fridays. I mean, here we are, closing in on. Well, we're 1 week away from the end of August, but God, number one, I can't even express how fast this year has just expired. This year just seems to be really moving fast, at least from my perspective. And here we are, we're kind of barreling into the fourth quarter here, and there's so much economic news and so much, and I don't know if economic news is good for you, Jeremy, but because it always seems like as mortgage lenders really sort of prepare to hunker down and investing in underwriters and to really sort of expand their operating capacity with an anticipation for refinances, all the other innovative discussions around moving the technology stack forward tend to pause or tend to slow down or tend to shift in its focus. But in my world, on the retail origination side, it's after essentially 2 quarters of modest profitability of about 15, 16, 18 basis points, which is miserable, but at least it's in the black versus in the red, to be able to head into the fourth quarter, which is always a fearful time in the industry as you go into the fourth quarter and then you're staring at the first quarter, which is almost always losses. To go into the fourth quarter with a lot of optimism is new. We haven't had this in probably 6 or 7 quarters. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely emotionally preparing myself for exactly what you said, for everything new to stop while the attempts to refi and originate kick up. I don't actually have a good sense. Like, I haven't heard what the projected volume is of how many deals were done in the last 2 years that would actually be in the money at like a 6% retail rate. And so it's almost like we're burying the lead, which is like, hey, rates are going to go down. But how many Americans is that actually helping? And then I think my second question this morning was, I was thinking a little bit about like how to ensure they get the best deal. In other words, is it going to go down more? Is it going to go down more? If you originate them in September or October, you can't originate them again in December or January. So there's going to be a weird moment of just like, did it go down enough?
Well, you can. The thing is, you can.
Who's in the money?
And that's the risk
you
for lenders.
Can't. Someone else can. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
They can refi. They can refi in September and December, but it's going to not be an ideal situation for the MLO who did the deal in September.
Well, 100%. So there's a couple tactical. I've been talking to a lot of lenders recently, a lot in the top 25, and a handful in the top 10. And what's interesting is most of that pricing risk is being built in. So as I compare pricing up the FICO bands and up the like the LTV bands, what's interesting is it's all over the map. Like, some lenders will price out a certain tranche because they're concerned that if a loan is done at a higher rate, and generally at a higher rate, the company makes more money, the branch makes more money from a retail standpoint, but it puts the consumer a bit at a disadvantage because you're getting a higher rate when you potentially could get a lower rate. but that particular lender could be pricing out the lower rates, or pricing out the higher rates in order to push them into the lower rates, which is kind of what you want to do. But some lenders aren't doing that, or a lot of them aren't. And so the pricing strategies really vary lender to lender depending upon their risk profile and what their appetite is. But the number I've heard and the number I can discern is that there's about 1 million plus or minus consumers, which is a fairly sizable number, that were in that, 6.5% to 7.5% tranche. And if we can refinance them at 5.7, 5.8, 6.25, 6.125, then there's a pretty broad applicable market there to be able to sort of go after. And this is where Greg shared that post on servicers, because the servicers become very, very powerful and very threatening to IMBs who've been shedding their servicing and selling their servicing rights off to Mr. Cooper, Freedom, New Res, and these other organizations, because all of a sudden these companies that aren't retail are going to become very relevant and very powerful to be able to go after what's called servicing runoff, to be able to go after and to reclaim the consumer from either another servicer, another lender, or to basically just refinance a loan that they bought from another lender, from Cassidy Lending or something. So but a million's pretty dramatic when you're looking at a market that's doing 4 or 5 million loans, right? Adding another million to that all of a sudden is a big stimulus boost, in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I think running your product and pricing engine over your portfolio from the last few years is a practice that the big lenders and the big servicers that you just mentioned are all pretty good at. I think there are actually some companies out there, and I'll mention one, Ardley, that I've worked with here and there. They are basically a third-party engine. You hire them, they run on your portfolio as a bank, regional bank, large bank, and they tell you who's in the money on a daily basis and exactly what that person's customized deal is. That's going to become the way business gets done from a refi perspective. So I'm sure the Coopers, the New Reses, they're all doing it too, right? So that means everybody's doing it. If they are already and everybody's chasing them with a partner, or at least the capability, the mindset to keep up with them, then yeah, calling your book and finding out that they're actually already in process is going to become a more and more likely scenario over the next.
It also seems like there's a few on the purchase side. Things are still pretty anemic, even though rates are down a bit, inventory's up for several months in a row, things like that. One of the theories that I read a lot lately is that it's that fear of that continual drop. It's not time to buy yet. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. And on refi, it's probably even more extreme. I'm just not as plugged into the refi conversations, but I have heard of a little bit of products or maybe pricing innovation and changes where, within a certain period of time, if rates drop within a certain band, you can get like a no cost refi and things like that. I mean, some of that's for jumbo, some of that's for current serviced clients, things like that. But are you guys seeing much of that type of innovation? That type of change?
I like that you brought that up, because I actually think somebody's going to come in. I've been kind of waiting for somebody to come in and try to win market share on price alone. We saw it happen once at Rocket. Yeah. I think towards the very end of the time we were there, where TPO was like
rate lock, where if it went down, you could go down, but if it went up, you stayed, I think. Yeah.
And I think there was just like, we can get this, this tranche or this partner channel. I think more and more the technology has caught up too. So I really like this idea that, like, last time around, we didn't actually have the data analytics in many cases, or we didn't have the channel set up to be much more dynamic. I think a lot of companies, Rocket included, have made the really dynamic, nimble pricing an option across channels, even probably within partners within the channels, I suspect, by this point. And so if you want to buy purchase, there is a bunch of ways you could do it. So I haven't seen it, to answer your direct question, but I suspect somebody's got to be sitting out there ready to try it as a strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, Jeremy, is that on a previous sort of LinkedIn post, I had talked about the future of mortgage, and I talked about like why, like right now, mortgage is very reactive, right? I have to go to a mortgage. I have to like have the awareness that there could be a possibility. I could save a little bit of money. I don't really know. But I'm going to but I know enough to maybe inquire, but there's so many people who don't know enough to even inquire, but I know enough to maybe inquire. So I'm going to inquire. And then I go through an application process, which I'm initiating as the consumer. And then some loan officer, whether or not I get a good loan officer, a bad loan officer, is going to advise me accordingly. And I sort of posed the question that, like, why wouldn't I just as the consumer get an email notification from a lender or my servicer to say, hey, good news, I just based on your preferences, you in advance consented to a refinance if I'm able to save you $125 a month, based on being willing to pay this much in closing costs. And so we looked at the market. You set this setting 6 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever it was. And guess what? We refinanced you. Next month, we're going to save you $138 a month, based on current market conditions. We did it for you. We're tracking your credit. We're tracking your LTV. We're tracking the money you're making. We know you currently still have a job, because we use Truve or some solution that intuitively knows that my deposits are consistent. And guess what? Just click I authorize, click this little button, this email, and it's done for you. You could be in traffic, get an email from your servicer, and hit done. And I didn't apply. It did it for me, and I saved $130 or $200 or whatever it was. I hear people talking about that. I see zero real movement on that from a technological standpoint.
The first time I heard of it, like in practicality, obviously it's been batted around, a lot of circles. Was a friend who works at a bank, so he works at JP Morgan. And so but it actually wasn't JP Morgan that offered it, but he was shopping banks for a jumbo loan in New York. And he was like, this one says no fee refi for 2 years. This one says, US Bank had a really good offer where it was a no fee refi for a period of time if it dropped within a certain band. They were giving like actual disclaimers of like, if this, then that type of scenarios. Sure. And he was like, hey, like you're in the mortgage industry. Is that like, should I be talking to like non-bank IMBs? Like, do they have better products for this? And I was like, I'll introduce you to some of my partners. Yeah. Like, we'll give you friends and family pricing that might beat it. But like, like my big partners at NewZip, like, NewRez and some other ones. But I was like, I don't know that anyone's going to beat that. That's interesting. You got good pricing plus these no fee refis for a period of time. But that's a tour, that's like a jumbo depository bank loan that's trying to make it work, taking into account other things. But all that to say, I am really curious, and maybe this is a Rick question, but you were sort of asking Jeremy at the beginning. Do you think, obviously purchase always slows down in Q4. This year, maybe it'll stay kind of similar-ish between rate drops and inventory growing. But do you think there's going to be the usual, like, forget about purchase and do the refi boom type of thing at a lot of lenders?
So I'm gonna answer your question a little bit by another chart, and it'll be kind of an indirect way of showing you. So refinance activity, without a doubt, will go up. I mean, we're already seeing that on the retail side, right? A real influx. Some, I was talking to one top 15 retail IMB yesterday, and he was saying we've already seen another 1,000 applications we didn't expect just in the last 48 hours on the refinance side, right? Purchase side, people are cautiously optimistic, but the big hurdle is this chart right here. Inventory is suffering. The existing home sales is now, granted, a lot of realtors have gotten out of the business out of fear of the implementation of the new rules, the new buy side rules, sell side rules. And so I do think that's
a whole other multi-hour conversation. Yeah.
No, for sure, right? I mean, there's so much going on right now, but the housing market's never like uncertainty, and there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the housing ecosystem
Right.
that hasn't helped, right? In certainty is what drives planning, and planning drives strategy, and strategy drives investments, and investments drive hiring and increase wages and hiring more people. So on one side of it, there's a lot of hiring in the operations side, and the real push for AI to be able to maybe absorb some of those overhead expenditures. But the other side of it is an uncertainty on the purchase side because of this chart. We're still at an abysmal level of existing home sales, and I don't know where we come out of that without like a lot of Jeremy's proposals, and he's talked about this extensively around whether it's municipally recodifying or encouraging from a federal or a state standpoint to zone specific areas for multi-unit, multi-housing kind of permits. I know in our town in Long Meadow, Massachusetts, for instance, the governor of the state had allowed for, in essence, like tiny homes, like the minimum requirement, I think, is 800 square feet that can be built on any property in the state of Massachusetts. So it superseded any municipal exclusion from having non-owner occupants on the property that's not family related.
So that's like ADUs in addition to like
yeah, correct.
So that's rattled a lot of, I'm in a liberal town, and of course we're like, need to house the migrants, but not here, not in our town. There tends to be this kind of resistance to having to embrace certain things for ourselves, but of course we champion it for others. In Long Meadow, now anyone could build an 800 square foot tiny home and rent that unit out for housing purposes. I don't even know how you can subdivide that, maybe even to sell that as a condo or some kind of standalone townhome or a duplex. But those types of innovations could potentially have a dent in housing inventory, but without just having massive tax breaks to really encourage Brock, Rick, and Jeremy to establish a new construction business where we're going to buy a bunch of land and then we're going to put capital up to build homes on it and then sell those, to really have an aggressive push for new builders to enter the market. I don't see any quick fix in existing home like inventory to actually go to the market.
Well, I don't think there's a quick fix in housing, period, full stop. But here's a couple of things of what you're saying. I do think there have been chips or chinks in the armor, however you say that. Like, there's been weaknesses in the usual NIMBY mindset. I think the not in my backyard mindset that you're talking about is real. It's real in every community across the country. Doesn't matter political persuasion. It is real. I do think, though, that increasingly people are starting to realize that housing is interconnected with economic development. And if you want your community to be dynamic, where people are shopping and buying things and doing different things, you have to have housing stability. And the only way to have housing stability is more units. This idea that we have to subsidize builders is bonkers to me, because I was reading, there's an article, I posted on LinkedIn. There was an article yesterday in the New York Times where somebody wrote a brilliant piece about housing in America, and they used Kalamazoo, Michigan as the cornerstone. But the comment was, the idea that there's a true free market in housing is fiction and always has been fiction. This is the most highly subsidized industry. He makes the argument of all of them, once you factor in land, streets, and infrastructure as also being part of the subsidy. So schools, land, and infrastructure, roads, lights, safety, if you count that as like location, you count that as part of the subsidy, the value of real estate, then you probably are the most subsidized. I'm sure somebody will find that like farming or something else is highly subsidized and come back at us and be like, no, farming's more subsidized. But my point is this.
We're ready for the oil company comments.
Yeah. So, okay. So we'll grant those. And yet from the GI Bill through today, we have a strategy that subsidizes certain types of home ownership and not all types of housing. And that's the whole ballgame. We have to look at housing holistically. We have to invest in it holistically. We got to get better economic returns, but we have to get communities realizing that housing stability is an economic driver. And if you want to be a dynamic economic community moving forward, housing is a really good way to do it. And that, I think, will change a lot of the opinion on housing supply.
Yeah.
Then comes what supply we choose to invest in. My takeaway from the article was it's got to be a policy choice. We're not going to do it any other way. It's going to be a policy choice either at the federal level or the state level. And if we don't do it, we don't do it. And we're going to continue to just favor existing homeowners in suburban communities over everyone else in America.
Yeah, I mean, how much societal value can we assign to not being a generation of renters is basically, the conversation. Like, past generations did, the GI Bill onwards did really well being a nation of homeowners, in a lot of ways. We're not tracking that way right now. Yeah.
Brock, you and I had a conversation very early on when we were talking about Rocket Homes and Rocket Mortgage working better together. We probably know each other less than a year at that point. Yeah. And we had a conversation where you said that I was always talking about these kind of like macro effects, things that ended up in like the Saturday Cup of Joe or whatever. And you made a really good point, which you're like, nobody's talking about the 30 years from now impact of the choices we're making right now.
Yeah, like the average retirees, like net worth is like 80% in their primary home. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. At that time, it was like 84% or something, I think. It's like, it's probably more now, honestly. It's wild. It's wild. Yeah.
So it's not a NIMBY or YIMBY conversation. It is, what is the health of the U.S. economy 20 years from now conversation. And yeah, we're not good at it making investments in this country. We're very transactional in this industry. We're very transactional in this country. But the bottom line is like, we can make holistic housing an economic driver. We can do it. We can do it in one city like Detroit. We can do it nationwide with political investment.
But my concern with there's a million concerns that underlie that. But my concern with the chart Rick just showed is that inventory is up about 23% year over year, last July to this July. And that chart was still downwards. So existing home inventory is up, rates are flat to down, and existing home sales was still down. I mean, obviously it takes buyers a minute to get ready. It takes buyers a minute to get approved. It takes buyers a minute to find the home. There's a lot of fear right now in real estate land about all the NAR changes, NAR settlement changes, which I'm talking about all day, every day, as you can imagine. But I think, but honestly, I'm pretty shocked. I thought we were going to see an immediate bump in purchase of existing homes. And we're not seeing it in August either so far as I can tell.
Isn't it because the inventory is in the wrong place?
We are, but at scale, yeah.
I think the inventory is not in the place where all the buyers are, right? Like we're seeing a highly regionalized aspect to this.
Yeah.
So I've been talking about it because I want policy to be infused with investment at the national level. But the reality is, like what you're talking about, the next 6 months of inventory is going to be a highly regionalized story. Some communities are going to find a lot of activity, and some communities are going to find very little activity. And we're going to hear both those stories as if they're national stories, but they're really not. They're going to be just stories about, mid-sized cities versus Sunbelt.
Yeah. A lot of my business partners at NewsZip live in Austin. 2 guys in our C-suite, including Audie, our CEO. So they're always telling me Austin specific stuff. And they're like, wow, there's like 50% more listings than there were last year. It's like, great, but those homes have tripled in value since 2019. So it's like, they're still not exactly starter homes. They went from $200,000 homes to $700,000 homes during that period. So it's nice that they're for sale, but it's hardly an entry-level home at $700,000 in Austin or whatever.
It used to be, apparently. Not anymore.
It is interesting. To Jeremy's point, there's no quick fixes. And to some degree, a lot of the fixes are micro fixes that end up serving the macro agenda or the macro vision of progress. But there's so many constituents, there's so many individual micro fixes that are required to be able to sort of, improve the edges. But, you eat enough of the edges and then you end up, consuming the whole pie. And that's why I think, Jeremy, your point is interesting, because, you know, no one would say that, well, I don't think anyone would really say that, let's take the veteran niche, or that one piece of that pie. No one would say that the investments in the, or few, would say that the investments in targeting veterans with unique products to be able to lower the barrier to home ownership for that constituency, because it's a national priority, right? We love our veterans, right? We so there's a narrative that we support those who have sacrificed for all of us. Therefore, we're going to do this for veterans. And there's initiatives like that in pieces for teachers, but not really as organized. And there's niches like that for firemen and policemen, but not really as organized. But I do think that, and there's some for like minorities and to encourage Black home ownership, but not really all that is. It's not as much. You can clearly say that putting veterans in a home is a higher priority than putting Black and Latinos in a home. Just pure, not, and I don't think that's
from a policy,
from a policy standpoint, and from a product,
the dollars and the focus in,
from the standpoint of just available products endorsed and encouraged by Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie. I think that's clearly an argument one can't debate or one can't refute. And so I think, to your point, Jeremy, you're saying there should be specific priorities around maybe each of these niche solutions. Could be urban solutions, rural solutions, to kind of take, to eat into the pie of home ownership, to be able to provide as much access and affordability for as many people as possible.
And there's ways to craft state level and federal level policies that benefit both. My point about factory built housing all the time is it works for both urban infill and rural housing development. Like, it is a product that can serve separate markets. So when you invest in something, you can still let the market decide what the price point is and who puts it where. There's tons of ways that housing still leverages the free market and competition and quality and price and sales to make these things happen. But you got to make the decision that your dollar investment has multiple dollar returns when you put it into creating jobs, creating housing, creating other economic stimulus. So to me, it's just how you want to do that, and then pick the ways in which it can serve a broad slice of the market.
Well, this was
complex.
This is an interesting. It's a related tangent, but it's somewhat of a tangent. At the Western Secondary Conference, what was interesting was there was some talk, around the lack of innovation by the GSEs, or I should say, the entire dependence that the IMBs have, or the mortgage industry have, in just purely government subsidized solutions, right? And so they're always looking at the GSEs to be the innovator of these new products, where the GSEs are kind of looking at the private industry to say, you guys come up with new products, you guys do proof of concept, provide us with the data that product X, Y, or Z performs, and then bring us that data to see if it's worthwhile of a demo or some kind of a beta program to be able to push at scale. And it's just, and I actually blame Freedom for this. I blame Stan for this, because, he's been so wildly successful just purely building a strategy around the safest possible strategy available, which is just suck from the teat of Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie, and that you get your milk, you're healthy, there's no, you stay safe, you don't do anything further, right? And I think it stifled sort of the creative energy that these mortgage companies could have allocated money that they've made into saying, we're going to create our own product. In fact, we're going to create our own demand, prove that these are, that we'll go to the rating agencies, get them valued, and then we're going to securitize them and build an investment appetite in and around the GSEs. But it just seems like there's such a we talk about product innovation, trying to do all these things, but it always comes through FHFA and whether or not the Fannie, Freddie, or Ginnie will end up insuring that product. And if it doesn't do it, it doesn't hit scale.
I mean, you're hitting Jeremy's #1 most said thing over the last 5 years. Everyone's just
Well,
selling.
it's called a softball pitch, Brock. It's called a softball pitch. I'm trying to crank the.
I mean,
crank the clown. I want the clown to come out of the box. I'm cranking it.
The nice thing that I would say is this has been very therapeutic over the last year because I've given up hope that anybody you just described is ever going to do that. I have a ton of respect for those non-agency loan buyers who are trying to craft securitizations. It is all around the edges, and it is relatively small as a percentage. But I have a ton of respect for them because they are doing really hard work convincing staunchy rating agencies of any kind of data-driven solutions or new things. But the reality is, I don't know what the conversations were like at Western Secondary that you're referring to, but it's talk about like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The IMBs are always going to be what they are. That is it. They are marketing sales organizations. They're marketing sales organizations for Fannie and Freddie. That's it. You're good at marketing and sales. And apparently we're willing to subsidize that to the tune of buying an NBA franchise. But for whatever reason, that's what we're good at. That's what we do. And it is always going to be a storefront for the implicit guarantee, which is pretty much an explicit guarantee at this point. But the implicit guarantee of Fannie and Freddie, that's it. That's what it is.
I'm not saying every IMB should do that. I just think there's a different responsibility for those that are in the top 20 or top 25 to invest in that, to move the needle from a leadership standpoint. In fact, I actually think that if you're going to be approved Fannie, Freddie, Jenny, and you're going to end up scaling to the degree that you are, there should almost be a responsibility. There almost should be a tax on you if you get to a certain level to say, well, no, but I think there's
like
I think that if you don't show that you're going to serve the public interest, which is what Fannie and Freddie Ginny are built to design to do, and you're not going to sort of expand the applicable market for consumer and home ownership. I just think that I think you're just lazy. I think it's lazy leadership. I mean, you're rich leadership. You're going to get very rich, but the point is you're not going to do anything to really move the needle. To your point, Jeremy, this is the 30-year point versus thinking about it now. They're not thinking about how we can move the housing industry 30 years from now and how to get our kids or grandkids into homes and in better circumstances. It's all about making a buck right now so I can retire in fish on a dock somewhere, rather than saying I helped a generation of homeowners afford a home that otherwise wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, there's no incentive. There's no incentive because that mortgage is not any more or less valuable today than the mortgage I can make.
And if you're publicly traded, and even if you're not, then you're almost forced to do the profitable, easy thing.
Well, the flip side of the punitive, the flip side of the punitive is adding those incentives, like you said. Maybe there's an extra quarter basis point in incentive on the product you are sending to Fannie Freddie if you do, or half a point if you do or invest in these areas. It should be positive and negative in my view.
Right. I think the problem there is that you run into a really conservative credit box at Fannie and Freddie that doesn't really know how to incentivize new mortgages or incentivize new data gathing for new types
but they're
of
not
mortgages.
Designed to do that.
They won't go well, right.
No.
So even putting 25 extra basis points, it's like it's a gridlock. I think what we're saying is the secondary market gridlock has created a lack of incentives or really no incentives for what you're describing to happen.
Yeah.
Do I think somebody could come in? I've been saying this a lot lately, and I do believe it. I think consumers have been trained to expect I paused. I don't know if I froze, so I just paused just in case.
No, yeah, that's perfect.
Consumers have been trained to look to big tech for a solution, like the one solution that comes in and solves a whole bunch of problems. So I do think there is an opportunity for somebody to come in and actually reframe housing finance, because consumers have started to believe this app does this and it solved for this. This app does this and it solved for it. There's a bunch of other smaller things that were failures that we didn't see, but like there are category kings in a lot of different categories of the consumer's life. And I think we've been trained over the last decade to like look for that. So I do think that this current existing businesses that aren't trying to be long-term value creators, the way you're talking about, are susceptible. They're susceptible to that. Because I think somebody could come along and gather up the market, especially for first-time home buyers. But it's a huge investment. And
let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Jeremy, because it's related to what you just said. From a legal standpoint, Mark Calabria said that that it's by law that the GSEs are to be in essence privatized, right? And then it could be misleading when he said, but it seemed like he said
got some quite a bit of cutting.
That wasn't me this time.
Yeah,
Rick, we lost you.
the highway
It's like
side,
really hard to guess.
Chats are a little dicey.
I was gonna say it's really hard to guess what he was about to say because all we heard was Congress passed a law that says eventually these things are moving back to the private market. The implication, I don't know the answer, or I don't know the question that Rick was going to ask on the implication there.
Okay.
We missed the whole question.
Can you?
We missed the whole thing.
Brock.
Yes. Rick, what are you saying?
Are you just saying our names now?
No.
Yeah.
Can you see me? Hear me?
We can.
Now we can.
Sort of.
You
We
can?
could not. We heard Mark Calabria legal. Oh, yeah, we're just getting you in and out, man. It's totally frozen in and out. I don't trust it, if that's what you're asking. I don't trust your connection. You can text me your question. I'll read it to you. Brock, one of the things that I think I've been struggling with a little bit is what makes sense, like on a whiteboard, or what makes sense in theory versus how it actually works in practice.
Oh, well, we were on a roll.
We were on a roll, man.
Oh, you can hear me. Perfect.
That one thing. We heard that one thing. Go ahead. Try again.
Is the GSEs required by Congress to come out of conservatorship and go private? Is that a law, or is it? Because Calabria said something to that effect, that he's like, look, don't shoot me. I'm just following the mandate as established by Congress, and I couldn't find that mandate, and I'm not a lawyer, so you tell me.
He's saying that the stock purchase by Treasury of Fannie and Freddie is intended to be temporary, that conservatorship was not intended to be unlimited, and it wasn't intended to be permanent. So when Congress allowed for the law that made Treasury the biggest single shareholder of Fannie and Freddie, that was not the goal, was to keep them inside the federal cocoon forever. The goal of that legislation says this is temporary. They will be moved back out. Those shares will eventually be transferred out of Treasury. And so what he's saying is he's just executing the will of Congress from the piece of legislation that originally made Treasury the owner, that would eventually end, sunset, and return to the public-private partnership they had. That's what he means. And so there is a real question that says maybe that never happened. Congress could absolutely do that. There's nothing stopping Congress from being like, no, Fannie and Freddie are just going to be this forever. They could do that, but they would have to pass a new law to do that. They'd have to amend the law or pass a new one to do that.
Would that be executive branch determined at all, or is that definitely legislation? Okay.
I mean, the
It'd be
executive
legislation.
branch can do a lot
Well,
to
obviously,
make it effectively permanent. The president can make it effectively permanent by essentially continuing the legislative gridlock that exists. If it never comes up before Congress, this just keeps going the way it exists. So the president could definitely make it longer.
There definitely seems to be a little more active conversation with the new Democratic ticket.
Look, I vote for candidate Potter, and if as candidate Potter ascends to the presidency, and I'm his chief of staff,
passing over some obvious choices right there.
And Brock, you can be our liaison between the branches of government, between the Senate and the House, But I think through executive order, we could get this done quickly. And then, Brock, you could do the dirty work and try to gain votes and try to get a good bill passed through Congress.
No comment.
It's about time we get a good activist from Maine. But what else, man? I mean, I know I went to Western Secondary. It was a phenomenal conference. I thought that's a better conference than even the NBA Secondary. I thought it was a lot of sizable players, good thought leaders. Spent a little time with Kevin Perrino and PRMG, and from Village Capital to to some of the folks that you're talking about, Veros and Deep Haven, and some of those investors who are really spending a lot of time in the non-QM space. Spent some time with Crib Equity, our friend Sky, and just I think the whole ecosystem is really evolving nicely, but I think it's just tepid because of the transition into the fourth quarter, without really everyone's sort of pricing in the adjustments. The quarter and everyone's expecting about a 50 basis point improvement between now and the next 6 months, next two meetings, Fed meetings. But I don't know. I mean, it's things are looking fairly optimistically from where I sit. What about you guys? What conferences are you attending, and how are you guys seeing the world?
I got a very full conference docket coming up. Going to the Jeremy Potter curated Real Edge. They're calling it a roundtable. Are we calling that a conference? What are we calling that, Jeremy?
Roundtable's fine.
Roundtable in Boston in 2 weeks? Fenway Park. That'll be fun. And then New England Mortgage Bankers, NEMBC, and then we'll be going to Blueprint, the PropTech Investor Conference, like VC PropTech. Acuma Credit Union Mortgage Conference, MBA Annual, and HousingWire IMB. Adi, our CEO, my partner, will be presenting at the Mortgage Collaborative Innovation Day. So he'll be at that conference covering NewZip. So we're just we'll go to the Lending Tree Summit in November. So I'll be on the road, or between me and Adi, we'll be on the road, I think, every single week throughout this fall, getting in front of all our partners. So
that's the way to do it, Brock. You're doing a great job, Brock, just by being present and visible and speaking and being on part of panels. And it's funny, the 40 under 40 awards have you ever been nominated for that or earned that? Has that been?
Yeah, I won that years ago. You always think it's like my first year in the industry. I won that like 3 years ago.
Oh, you did? Okay, got it. Well, no, I know you're like.
Don't age shame me. No.
No, but you're young. I mean, you're what, 34? How old are you?
I'm younger than 34. But I won the HousingWire Rising Stars thing, I think 3 years ago when I was at.
No, I'm giving you a compliment. I mean, it's well deserved, and Jeremy and I've aged out of all that. So
if you want to recommend me for any of the mortgage specific industry ones, haven't gotten so many of those, but the real estate side, I was lucky enough to get some of those back at Easy Enough a couple of years ago.
Yeah, do you like, Jeremy, how I lumped you and I in the same category? How you and I have aged out of it, but
it's true, man. Once you cross a certain threshold, we're all in this together. I will note, though, I think it goes like 50s, 40s, 30s. So we are covering a really nice range of professional life here.
I'm gonna nominate you for the Vanguard Award, Jeremy. So you're gonna be
lifetime achievement. The Gold Watch Awards. Yeah,
I got a lot of gray hairs coming in, so it's taking its toll.
Those are self-imposed. But
so busy season. I know you guys are going to a lot of the same stuff, but any differences?
I'll just share, if anybody's watching this, I'll be in Chicago next week for NAR's IOI conference. That's NAR's innovation event. And then I'll be back after that talking to you all. So good to see you. Have a great weekend.
See you in Boston.
Take care, guys.
All right.
Bye. Bye.